So I've started to make the deck coverings for the rear part of the hull. This is an area about 1 foot in depth and 2 feet wide. And on the one side I am making a little curved cover just to make it look nice. That will be permanently installed. On the starboard side I'm going to make a small hatch cover. It'll look identical to the one on the port side, but this one will be removable just so I could have access to any of the cabling coming through, such as the steering cable. So I have the first piece of cedar on the rear hatch cover glued into place and scribed, and I had to scribe it very carefully because this will be a seam along here and I'd like to keep it as invisible as possible. Anyway, this is the first piece glued in place. When this dries, then I could just continue going across, same as I did on the other side. And I believe I will be putting some sort of inlay on here. I'll have to figure out what that is. So I decided I was going to make a couple more inlays, and I'm going to use a procedure that I talked about before where I'm basically making imitation inlay using iron-on strips and ironing them onto a logo. So the first thing you do is print out the logo you want, and then you hold that up against the window and trace out on the back so you have that image on both sides. And then you need to cut up little strips of whatever you're using. I'm using red oak, and I'm going to be ironing them onto the logo, and that's about it. So I will do that first. I've got my iron getting hot, and it doesn't say on the instructions at all on what temperature you're supposed to have it on, but you pretty much know if it's working or not. If it's not hot enough, well then the glue won't melt and it won't stick, and you just make it hotter. Anyways, I'll turn the camera off and iron some on. So there I have the first piece of oak veneer ironed on, and I'm going to be doing the next piece, and I'll just keep on doing that until I work my way across the entire maple leaf picture, and then it'll be ready for cutting out. So all the strips are ironed on the first logo, and now I will need to do it on the second logo. Need to cut a few more pieces for this one, and then what I'll do after is cut it out using the pattern on the flip side of the page. So now I have both logos completely covered with the oak wood strips. And one thing I need to mention is whenever you're using an iron or anything hot, be very careful, especially with a steam iron. You might get a steam burn, so just be careful. So using a cheap pair of dollar store scissors, I'm going to first cut the bulk of the excess off, and it just makes it a little bit easier if you just kind of cut the bulk of the material off first, and then the second cut I will work my way in very carefully along the lines to make sure it comes out perfect. If your scissors slip, you've got a slot cut into your logo, and it's not the end of the world, but try and be very careful at this point. So here I have the bulk of the material cut off of my logo, and I will now proceed to do an exact cut right into the lines, and when I am finished, this is what it'll look like on the back. And when I flip it over, that's what you'll have, is a nice logo that looks like it's strips of individual oak pieces, and you could either epoxy that right down onto your deck just like that and epoxy over it. Of course that will sit proud a little bit on your deck, but if you don't want to router into your deck, then that's certainly a way you could do it. What I'm going to do this time is on my deck I'll router in just a small depth, probably a 32nd of an inch, and inlay that. And there are my two oak logos completed, ready to be installed onto the decks. You may, instead of using a cheap pair of scissors, you might want to use a sharp X-Acto knife, but again, be very careful you don't cut your hand, and also don't be cutting it on your good table. Anyways, I'll have to sand those decks down and then get ready and router them, and then lay these inlays into them. So I now have both stern end caps or end decks sanded. I still have to fill in some of the cracks, but I've traced on the decal in pencil, and I'm going to router that down probably about a 32nd of an inch, and inlay. So I'm going to inlay my maple leaf decals. So it'll be just like that. So I finished routering out both of the end caps, and now I could just set that right inside, and I'll epoxy that in, and it'll be nice and flush. So both stern hull caps or hatches are completed with the inlay. I now have to coat the two with some epoxy and fill in the cracks, but it's looking pretty good. This is one of the end caps. It's completely finished. It's been glassed, epoxied, and sanded, so it's all ready for varnishing. And I did have some pictures where it was completely glassed before I sanded it, but I've lost them for some reason. I have no idea how that happened. And this is the back side, so it's glass on the inside for extra strength. But I imagine at some point somebody is going to be stepping on this deck, and I want it to be really strong. So it has 6 ounces of glass on the inside, 6 ounces of glass on the outside. And when it's varnished, it's going to come up nice and shiny again. So I have the first coat of varnish on a bunch of the pieces, these hatch covers, and now you can see the shine coming back into it. So they came out quite nice. So this is the deck on one of my canoes, and you can see I have an inlay which is not really inlaid, it's just the the maple leaf, sitting on top of the deck, epoxied in place. And you can see that it sits a little bit proud, and it actually enhances the look in a lot of ways by giving it a three-dimensional view. Anyways, that's the other method you can use for doing any, supposed inlay. You don't have to actually router into your deck to do an inlay. Anyways, I just thought I'd like to show that to you as an example of just laying it on top of the deck. The rear hatch cover is set in place. The final installation will come later after I finish the rest of the hull of the boat. Still needs some sanding and then varnishing, but you get an idea of what it'll look like. And this one will be removable. And they'll have access to any of the cabling, steering cabling, power cabling, etc. that'll come out to the motor. So I have 8 support posts laminated together, and this is out of oak. It's about 1 3/4 by 1 3/4 in diameter, and after I plane these and finish these, the posts will mount like this, with a hinge at 3 spots: bottom, middle, and top. And so this will allow the canopy to fold down and raise up for transportation purposes. The mechanism I'll use for holding it up will be gas lifts, and they'll be at the top, at the canopy, and also at the deck level. So all the posts have been epoxied and sanded and ready for varnishing. And these are all the little support pieces that will go on the deck, and some of them on the canopy, and the hinges will attach from, and then the posts will attach to these pieces on the deck and on the canopy with hinges, as well as gas lifts. So I'll put another coat on tomorrow, and so that'll be 2 coats over top of the epoxy. Might be enough, because the epoxy, there's 2 coats of epoxy. So I think it would have pretty good protection against UV. I might go a 3rd coat.